Welcome to AI Podcast. Today, we'll discuss the most important current affairs from the Hindu 16 June 2026 edition, with detailed analysis for UPSC aspirants in this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. Usually when you flip on the news, it really feels like you're just drowning in noise, right?
Oh, absolutely. You get a headline about a war on one channel, a ticker about inflation on another, and someone yelling about the climate on a third.
Yeah, the sheer volume is just overwhelming. And worse, it all feels entirely disconnected from one another.
It creates a sense of, profound anxiety, because it feels like 100 random isolated crises are happening all at once.
Right, but when you step back, you realize you aren't looking at isolated incidents at all. You are looking at an interconnected system reacting to massive stress.
And if you look closely, the world is actually shifting underneath our feet in very specific, connected ways.
Exactly. We are moving from historical peace deals that rewrite global trade to revolutionary warfare tactics to invisible climate threats.
So our mission in this deep dive is to cut entirely through that noise. We are not just going to read you the headlines.
No, we are going to extract the core insights, explain the underlying mechanisms, and connect the dots. We want you to understand exactly how and why these events shape the world you live in.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start with the macro picture. We are witnessing a massive geopolitical shift in West Asia right now.
We really are, and it is having immediate, highly visible ripple effects on your wallet here in India.
Definitely. So the U.S. and Iran have just announced a preliminary peace agreement to end their conflict.
Which is, it's a monumental development for global logistics. The two nations have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire to negotiate nuclear programs and Western sanctions.
Right. But the immediate tangible impact for the global economy is the lifting of the U.S. naval blockade and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, and we also see the unfreezing of $24 billion in Iranian assets. That completely alters the financial landscape of the region.
I always think of the Strait of Hormuz like the global economy's jugular vein, When it is blocked, the pressure rises everywhere, instantly.
That's a really good way to put it. When it opens, the whole world basically breathes a sigh of relief.
Interestingly, though, while Iran has stated they won't charge transit tolls per se, they are implementing fees for navigation services, environmental protection, and ship insurance.
Yeah, it's a nuanced distinction, but a critical one for global shipping logistics. They aren't charging you just to pass through, but they are charging for the infrastructure required to pass safely.
Which makes sense. Prime Minister Modi has already welcomed the deal, expressing hope that it restores regional stability.
And for India, regional stability in West Asia translates directly to energy security.
Which brings us right to the domestic impact. Because the blockade we just saw in West Asia directly hit our economy.
Right. Let's look at the new data. Wholesale Price Index, or WPI, inflation surged to 9.7% in May 2026.
Wow. And that is the highest it has been since the government updated the base year to 2022-23.
Exactly. And the main culprit is undeniably the energy sector. Crude oil and natural gas prices shot up by a staggering 61.5%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly how global energy shocks cascade through a domestic economy.
High crude prices don't just make filling up your petrol tank more expensive. They increase the cost of manufacturing every single good that requires transport.
Which is essentially everything.
Right. And ultimately, that shock lands straight on food prices.
However, what's equally important here for governance observers is the structural shift the government is making regarding how we measure this inflation.
Yes, they are planning to phase out the WPI entirely over the next 5 years. They want to replace it with the Producer Price Index, or PPI.
And they released the first editions of the output and input PPIs, along with the service PPI, just recently.
To understand why this matters, we need to look at what WPI actually fails to capture. WPI measures the change in prices of goods sold in bulk by wholesale businesses.
Right, but it includes things like indirect taxes and transport costs, which can really muddy the waters.
Precisely. If the government raises taxes on a raw material, WPI goes up. It makes it look like the cost of production surged, when in reality, it was just a tax policy change.
So the Producer Price Index, on the other hand, measures the average change in prices received by domestic producers for their output. It completely strips out those indirect taxes and transport margins.
So the PPI essentially cleans the lens we use to view the economy. It gives policymakers a pure look at what it actually costs a factory to make a good.
Without the noise of taxes or delivery fees. Plus, unlike WPI, it finally includes the services sector, which brings India in line with IMS standards.
But, looking through that economic lens reveals a fascinating contradiction in our trade numbers right now.
Oh, definitely. India's merchandise exports hit a record high of $45.2 billion in May.
That is an 18% growth, driven heavily by engineering goods and electronics.
But our trade deficit still widened to $10.5 billion. So I have to ask, if we're breaking export records left and right, why should we care about a widening deficit? Does it mean we are actually losing ground?
Well, a widening deficit doesn't necessarily indicate a loss of economic ground. Rather, it reveals the specific nature of our manufacturing boom.
How so?
Because our imports grew even faster than our exports, hitting 22.1% growth or $73.4 billion.
I see.
Because India is aggressively scaling up its manufacturing, especially in high-tech electronics and advanced engineering, we have to import massive amounts of raw materials.
Right. Things like rare earth metals, components, and heavy machinery to actually build those finished products.
Exactly. It is like opening a highly profitable bakery, but having to import expensive industrial ovens and premium flour to keep up with the orders.
That makes total sense. The export record is a victory, but the deficit shows we are still highly dependent on external supply chains to fuel the very engine of that growth.
Which is why securing those supply chains and strategic partnerships is currently the top priority for the Ministry of External Affairs.
India is actively capitalizing on the current global realignment to secure these inputs.
Yeah. We just saw the first visit by an Indian prime minister to Slovakia since the country was founded in 1993.
PM Modi and Slovak PM Robert Fico have officially branded their relationship a comprehensive partnership.
They signed several memoranda of understanding focusing heavily on digital technology. We are talking about AI, semiconductor supply chains, STEM labor mobility.
And a joint working group on terrorism. But the most vital component of that partnership is the letter of intent to promote defense cooperation.
Absolutely. The semiconductors and digital tech India is trying to secure aren't just for consumer electronics. They are the foundational components rewriting how modern warfare is conducted.
And that focus on digital tech and semiconductors leads us to a fundamental shift in global security.
We are moving away from the era of multi-million-dollar jets and tanks to something far cheaper and honestly a lot more terrifying.
We need to dissect the drone warfare revolution.
The conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia have completely shattered the old paradigm of military superiority. We are seeing a definitive shift from conventional arsenals to industrial-scale drone warfare.
Ukraine really pioneered this by taking commercial drones, the exact kind you might buy for amateur aerial photography, and rapidly adapting them into precision-guided munitions.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. The economics of this are entirely distorted.
It completely flips the traditional cost-benefit analysis of war, doesn't it?
Exactly. We were talking about an FPV or first-person view kamikaze drone. It costs maybe $500.
An operator wears VR-style goggles, flies it via a live video feed, and crashes it directly into a piece of heavy artillery or a tank that costs $5 million.
The return on investment for the attacker is just staggering, and the arsenal goes far beyond small quadcopters.
You have heavy-lift hexacopters, which the Russians dubbed Baba Yaga after the folklore witch.
Specifically because they're designed to drop heavy anti-tank mines at night, totally bypassing traditional armor. You also have what are called loitering munitions.
Let's break that term down for a second. A loitering munition isn't a missile you fire at a specific target.
No, it's a drone you launch into an area and it essentially loiters. It flies around passively, sometimes for hours, acting like a sniper in the sky.
It waits until its sensors spot a target of opportunity, and then it dive bombs.
It removes the need for immediate targeting data. But the most significant and frankly alarming innovation happening right now is the fiber optic drone.
Right, because traditionally the most effective defense against an incoming drone is electronic warfare, or EW.
Militaries use powerful jammers to scramble the radio frequencies between the drone and the human pilot. That causes the drone to lose its signal and fall out of the sky.
But a fiber optic drone bypasses the radio spectrum entirely. It literally spools out an ultra-thin physical wire as it flies.
It transmits commands and a high-definition video feed through light in that physical cable, meaning it emits zero radio signals.
And you cannot jam a physical cable with electronic warfare.
Exactly. It renders billions of dollars of electronic jamming equipment obsolete overnight.
Wow. So military power is no longer just about having the most sophisticated, expensive technology.
It is about what strategists call industrial endurance, the ability to continuously mass-produce, adapt, and deploy these incredibly cheap unmanned systems at a scale of tens of thousands.
Warfare has just become a ruthless test of manufacturing capacity and supply chain resilience.
And this isn't just a threat restricted to faraway battlefields. This is an immediate, actionable concern right here in India.
The Union government just issued a nationwide alert regarding rogue drones targeting vital areas and vital installations. They classify these as VAVIs.
The threat of drone attacks on critical infrastructure, power grids, military bases, ports is severe.
In response, the Marine Security Wing and the Ministry of Home Affairs are rapidly deploying localized anti-drone technology. They are conducting advanced trials along the sensitive Punjab border.
Notably, the VO Chidambaram port in Tamil Nadu just became the first Indian port to implement a comprehensive anti-drone system.
Because ports are incredibly vulnerable choke points. I mean, a single cheap drone hitting a fuel terminal could paralyze regional shipping for weeks.
Right. So we have human beings mastering cheap technology to absolutely dominate the physical battle space.
But when we look at our fight against nature and the climate, our most advanced, multi-billion-dollar tech is hitting a dangerous wall.
Let's look at the critical vulnerability of artificial intelligence in forecasting extreme weather.
A new study published in Science Advances compared cutting-edge AI weather models, like Google's GraphCast and Huawei's Pangu Weather, against traditional physics-based models, like the European Center's HRES.
AI models are incredibly fast and highly accurate for day-to-day normal weather patterns. But the study found a fatal flaw. They consistently failed to predict record-shattering extreme weather events.
The underlying mechanism for this failure is called the extrapolation problem.
Yes. These AI models are trained entirely on historical data sets, specifically looking at global weather patterns from 1979 to 2017.
They are phenomenally good at interpolating meaning. If you give them a set of conditions they have seen before, they can connect the dots perfectly.
But they cannot extrapolate beyond what they know. Traditional models use fundamental physics and mathematical equations, things like the laws of thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, atmospheric pressure.
Because they calculate based on physics, they can predict what will happen, even if it has never happened before in recorded history.
AI, however, only knows the past. So when unprecedented atmospheric conditions develop, the AI essentially places an invisible cap on its predictions.
It assumes the temperature simply cannot go higher than its historical training data allows. It is like an AI trained to drive a car that has only ever driven on perfectly dry roads.
That's a great analogy.
It knows all the rules of the dry road perfectly, it steers efficiently, it brakes smoothly, but suddenly you put it on black ice, an entirely unprecedented physical environment, and it has absolutely no idea how to react.
Because it has never experienced the loss of traction before. It just keeps trying to drive normally while the car spins out of control.
This raises an important question for global governance. What happens when civil administrations rely on these AI models for early warning disaster systems?
If a municipal government relies on an AI model that underestimates a severe heat wave by 5 degrees because of this extrapolation cap, their emergency response deployment will be completely inadequate.
When dealing with extreme weather, the gap between a predicted 42 degrees and an actual 47 degrees is quite literally a matter of life and death.
And we are seeing the physical toll of these unpredicted extremes right now.
A new study in the journal NPJ Clean Air looked at what happens to our atmosphere during these severe heat waves in northern India, specifically focusing on surface ozone pollution.
During recent heat waves, ozone levels spiked to between 85 and 110 micrograms per cubic meter. For context, the World Health Organization's absolute safe limit is 70.
To understand the danger, we have to understand how surface ozone forms. It is not directly emitted from car tailpipes or factory smokestack.
No, it forms when other primary pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and volatile organic compounds react chemically in the air.
But that chemical reaction requires sunlight and intense heat to occur.
A heat wave acts like a giant atmospheric oven, rapidly cooking these primary chemicals into toxic surface ozone.
Breathing that in is like taking sandpaper to your lungs. The study linked this massive ozone surge during heat waves to thousands of additional deaths from ischemic heart disease.
Which is when your heart doesn't get enough blood and oxygen.
Exactly. As well as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD.
While the heat itself causes heat stroke and dehydration, the study proves that the secondary effect, the chemical ozone pollution created by the heat, acts as an invisible multiplier.
It pushes vulnerable people, especially those with pre-existing conditions, completely over the edge.
So, who exactly bears the brunt of this? Helpage India just released a comprehensive study on climate-resilient aging, highlighting the severe plight of the rural elderly.
The statistics are just devastating. During periods of extreme heat, 74% of the rural elderly experienced direct illness.
And 60% felt their own homes offered no safety from the temperatures.
This physiological vulnerability is heavily compounded by economic vulnerability. The study found that a staggering 52% of these elderly individuals could not afford the essential medicines needed to treat the respiratory and cardiac illnesses exacerbated by the heat and ozone.
Their primary source of income is often just a meager state pension, which is entirely inadequate for adapting to extreme, unprecedented climate events.
So what does this all mean?
It means climate change is no longer just an abstract environmental issue discussed at global summits. It is a targeted demographic health crisis.
It is actively attacking the lungs and hearts of our most vulnerable citizens who lack the financial means to protect themselves.
Acknowledging that reality requires a fundamental shift in governance. We must move from viewing climate change strictly as an environmental problem to addressing it as a core issue of public health, human rights, and state accountability.
Because the ability of the state to protect its people from these unseen threats is deeply tied to how it enforces fundamental rights domestically.
Protecting vulnerable populations is ultimately about holding the state apparatus accountable to its own laws.
Let's examine a few major domestic developments on this front, starting with the displaced Kashmiri Pandits. There was a major two-day international conference held in Srinagar called Pragash, which translates to the first light of dawn.
The community is formally demanding what they define as a structured phase of engagement for their safe return to the Kashmir Valley.
They have outlined very specific policy demands to the government. These include the establishment of a dedicated township in Srinagar's Rainawari area,
as well as the formation of a formal commission of inquiry and official public policy recognition of the Kashmiri Pandit genocide.
The push for a structured phase of engagement is significant because it attempts to move the issue away from ad hoc political relief measures and firmly into institutionalized legal public policy.
And moving from demands for restorative justice to the active checking of police power, we have a massive ruling from the Allahabad High Court regarding the misuse of preventative detention.
This was the Chender Pal Singh case. Preventive detention is an extraordinary legal tool that allows the state to detain someone before a crime occurs,
Provided they are deemed a severe threat to public order or national security, of course.
However, the High Court heavily criticized executive officials in Uttar Pradesh for a highly irresponsible use of this sweeping power over incredibly minor, everyday disputes.
To illustrate the scale of the misuse, the court noted that in Ghaziabad alone, around 2,500 people were subjected to preventative detention proceedings in just a single year.
Officials were utilizing a law meant for severe threats to lock people up over neighborhood arguments and minor property disputes simply as a shortcut to maintain peace.
But the High Court didn't just issue a verbal reprimand. They fundamentally altered the administrative incentive structure by introducing a financial deterrent.
That is the groundbreaking administrative precedent of this ruling. The court stated that compensation for unlawful detention can now be recovered directly from the personal salaries of the offending executive magistrates or police officers.
Following a disciplinary hearing, of course, it transforms an abstract violation of constitutional rights into a direct personal financial liability for the individual bureaucrat involved.
When an officer's personal salary is on the line, the casual misuse of detention laws is likely to stop overnight.
Now, the final legal battle we're tracking today involves the Protection of Children's Rights and the Right to Education, or RTE Act.
The Supreme Court is demanding answers from the Punjab government regarding a staggering 15-year failure to implement Section 12(1)(c) of the Act.
That section mandates that private unaided schools must reserve a 25% quota for children from disadvantaged groups.
It is a stark textbook example of how a legislative mandate fails at the implementation level due to bureaucratic friction.
At the same time, the Karnataka High Court has stayed a state circular that attempted to extend this very RTE quota beyond the 8th grade into classes 9 and 10.
Private school associations pushed back aggressively, and the court halted the extension. So why is a foundational law passed way back in 2009 still facing these massive implementation failures in 2026?
Is it a simple lack of funding from the state? Or is it a lack of administrative will to take on powerful private school lobbies?
It is invariably a complex combination of both. Private schools resist the quota by citing chronically delayed or entirely inadequate financial reimbursements from state governments for hosting these students.
State governments, in turn, struggle with budget allocations, competing priorities, and poor administrative follow-through.
The friction between the state's failure to pay and the private sector's refusal to accommodate creates a massive deadlock.
And ultimately, it is the disadvantaged students who bear the total cost of this administrative failure. The system gets clogged, and the most vulnerable pay the price.
Well, that brings us to the end of our analysis for today. Just take a second to zoom out and look at the incredible breadth of what we've covered in this deep dive.
We started with global peace treaties in West Asia, dictating the cost of your fuel and reshaping India's inflation metrics.
We looked at how incredibly cheap, unjammable fiber optic drones are redefining the very concept of military power and forcing massive changes in our domestic security infrastructure.
We explored how the invisible cooking of ozone in an unprecedented heat wave is directly threatening the hearts of the rural elderly.
And how the highest courts in the land are currently battling over the limits of police power, financial accountability for bureaucrats, and the fundamental right to a child's education.
These aren't just isolated news stories printed on different pages of a paper. These are the gears of the world turning.
Directly impacting your daily life, your economic security, and your civil rights. Understanding these deep connections is exactly what makes you an incredibly well-informed participant in society.
Because true knowledge isn't just about collecting a list of facts. It is about seeing the hidden patterns that shape our collective future.
Speaking of the future, I want to leave you with a lingering, somewhat philosophical thought. We talked about how our most advanced artificial intelligence cannot accurately predict extreme weather because it has only ever been trained on the data of the past.
It physically cannot extrapolate a future it hasn't seen in its training data. The AI's imagination is strictly limited by historical boundaries.
But our global climate, our geopolitics, and our technology are rapidly entering entirely uncharted territory. The temperatures are rising higher, the drones are getting smarter, the map itself is fundamentally changing.
So if our most sophisticated algorithms are inherently blind to a future that looks nothing like the past, are we blindly handing the steering wheel to these models just as we drive completely off the edge of the known map?
It is an incredibly sobering thought to mull over as we build the systems of tomorrow. Something to keep you up at night, or at least keep you questioning the unseen systems we rely on every day.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Remember, this analysis was custom tailored just to help you cut through the overwhelming noise of the news cycle. Keep being insanely curious, keep connecting the dots, and keep questioning the world around you. We'll catch you next time.